Hey everyone, Bryan here. And on this episode of the podcast, we are recording this in the middle of December 2025. And while lots of you are thinking about Christmas parties and hanging out with your family, because I know I am, we're going to dig into, I think, the most important part of understanding deal flow and how deal flow affects your business and how it affects your revenue and affects everything that drives the business. We're going to be talking about Bryan's 5 laws of selling. And while the terms that you may use are different, the concepts are not. I have been using this successfully for more than 30 years at this point, and it has served me well. So I want to go ahead and dig into the value propositions at each level and why it matters and how you can simply use this 5-step approach to rethink your business of how you treat the sales and marketing process. And importantly, how you use that to drive revenue and understanding that some levels are not going to be revenue generators and some of them are, and understanding that you have to move them from step to step to step to step to move them through the process. Unless you're selling a transaction, like if you're selling gas, it's about convenience, maybe price, maybe the coffee. But for most of your listeners, and certainly people that are in the high-end service space, selling complicated things that are more than, $30, which is the vast majority of the people we work with, and that I work with personally and professionally and have for a long time, this will help you understand where things matter. And if you re-listen to the 2 episodes previously that talked about the long game of referrals and some referral math, this is going to understand, like, once they become a referral, how do you move them through the process so they come from being a referral to being a client and then a client for life. So let's go ahead and jump in. All right. So if you think about what people talk about, and you may have seen this, you've seen this, this concept of a funnel, right? And and the funnel part of it is basically, you talk about this kind of this big sales funnel, and you're driving people down the funnel, right? And so people, they'll talk about stages, and they'll talk about, market qualified leads and sales qualified leads and all this other fancy words, but we're not going to use those today because I'm a regular person. I want to talk in regular English and use words that we use that mean something to us as a business and a business owner and a contributor and a producer, and not as a Salesforce administrator or a CRM administrator, because there's a translation that happens, moving them from concept to application, because in a CRM, like Go High Level or HubSpot or Salesforce or whatever you're using. I did see someone recently, they're still using Act, my favorite program of all times. I learned CRMs on Act, and it was fantastic. Just go ahead and adjust the camera here like I'm crooked. Anyway, so let's go ahead and talk about that a little bit. So our first stage of sales would be something we call suspects. What are suspects? Suspects are exactly that. People who we think might be doing business that could be a good fit. Some people use this as a cold leads list, and some people think it's just a lead list. So the idea in our referral model is, hey, who is the perfect referral for me? A suspect is somebody who potentially could be the right person to do business with us, that we think that could be a good person to do business with us, but we're not really sure. And we don't know anything about them, but we do know that they could be a good fit, right? So that's sales stage number 1. Our second sales stage, if I can keep making this work right, is something we call a prospect. Oh, Bryan, wait a second. They're the same. They're on my list. They're really a prospect. No, they're not. Leads, names on a board are not leads. Names on a board are names on a board. We don't know much about them. There's some very distinct things we need to understand about this. And why am I so adamant about this is because in my consulting practice and in my business client relationships and in our own relationships, there's a huge difference between suspects and prospects. Just because you think they are a buyer of your products and services, we don't know anything about them that they're a prospect of buyers and services. So a prospect would be something that we know something about the company, right? So we know, or the person or prospect. So like if you're in home services, hey, guess what? A suspect may be driving down the street. A prospect may be seeing a new homeowner. So if someone bought a new home, we're in the Naples market. I've talked about our business as an interior design business, as one of our home service businesses. We know that in our niche, 90%, probably now maybe 80% of our customers who are people that have actively purchased a property or a condo in the markets we serve. And we have very narrow niches of what they look like, what kind of economic background they have in, all that stuff. But we know something about them, right? So there's something can be about them, could be a demographic, right? So it could be a dollar amount. It could be a location. It could be something, it could be some other concept that, matters with it. Like this example, we know an activity based, right. So we might know that they're a new purchaser. They have a new location. They need new equipment, like what all that stuff is, right? So any of that stuff. So in the case of Tier Design, right? Someone buys a new condominium. It's $3 million and above. They're in a certain neighborhood and they work with one of 3 realtors. There's an 80% chance those people are going to come to us because we have built fantastic relations with the building management, as well as the neighbors, as well as the 2 or 3 realtors who serve those, right? Again, micro niches, don't need big farms. For those of you listening to the Kennedy World and what's going on with the magnetic marketing coaching, I'm really good friends with the person who runs that. And we're talking about farms, right? How we are building farms. So there's all these demographic stuff, but then there's the psychographic, little kind of a big word, but we don't care about it. We're going to talk about the psychological part of it, right? So people that want something, right? They want a new car, they want a new vacation, they want a new whatever, they want a hot tub in their backyard, they want to upgrade their pool. So we have to know some things about that. Generally, for me, I want for them to become then them to be kind of moving to the next step, because at every step we're going to talk our words, our marketing is going to do different things, right? So our marketing is going to be different for a suspect than it is for a prospect, just the way it is. So that's just the way it works. So in order for it to be a qualified prospect, we typically want 2 to 3 things at a minimum to be known about them. So we know they purchase new, we know they have a certain net worth, and we know they live in a certain community, and we know that there's a chance, right? So that's the kind of basic. So this is the level of prospecting. If we think about, lead generation, these are basically just leads. So if people talk about leads, but what they don't realize is that they're not really leads until we know something about them, because they're not really opportunities. So now we're going to talk about stage 3. So that's where they become opportunities. So now we're going to turn that into an opportunity. And this is where it's a little different and a little bit of a subtlety. So in the opportunity stage, we have to know, a little bit about what it is their buying cycles are. So if you're in B2B, you have to know that they're actively in the market, or could be in the market, for what your products and services are. Are they in the market, right? People, a lot of in the B2B space, people are selling return on investments, they're selling convenience, they're selling the next greatest thing, the next big opportunity. But those opportunities, sometimes they're customer driven, sometimes they're vendor driven, and sometimes they are basically sales driven, right? So there's really the 3 biggest parts of it. Now, when I first got started in the business 30 years ago, it was a lot of times it was really vendor and sales driven, right? Because we were driving the bus. Hey, I was in the tech space. We would have a piece of technology that if you used SAP and you had more than 5 locations, including 3 manufacturing locations, and you had a customer facing locations, the time for the transaction, meaning pushing the button, could take a long time. So we had some technology, we sold some technology that could figure out where the bottlenecks were. So like today, bandwidth is ubiquitous, but there's always times things are lagging. Would it be really important if you're on the sales floor? We had a customer who was a home builder, and every time they hit the button, they'd have to wait 40 seconds. Well, when you're building a house for someone sitting in a sales center, and there's 150 decisions you got to make in the 3 hours you're there, and it takes you a minute every time you hit the click button to decide what color paint do you want? Click. What color shutters do you want? Click. What color roof do you want? Click. What color water table do you want? Click. What color pavers do you want? Click. If it takes a minute, obviously I'm being dramatic, you could do that. So that was the case where the customer had a problem. They didn't know what the answer was, right? Today, with ChatGPT, Gemini, Google, the internet, right? More than 80% of our customers generally have an idea of what the answer is before we get started. I'm going to say that again. Probably over 80% of people you talk to in your business already know that they have a problem. They think you might be an answer to it. So that makes it a real opportunity. So that's when we qualify them as an opportunity. So again, our language from a marketing point of view is going to be different because we know they're actively in the market. Okay, cool. Oh, Bryan, wait a second, but I don't work that way. Yes, you do, right? You meet someone on the street, they go from suspect to prospect. You talk about them, you have some conversations, and then all of a sudden, this whole suspect to opportunity could happen at a trade show in 5 minutes. But in your mind, they're going to go from one level to another, right? So that's just how it works. So that is the third sales stage of every single sales opportunity on the planet. Then we're going to move, which is fun, which is a deal. Is there the ability to do what known factors do we have, right? Do we know, well, let's go. So do we know what the project scope is? Do we know what they're buying? Do we know what they're not buying? Are they buying a pump? Are they buying a kitchen? Are they buying a supply source for raw materials for a 2-year period? What is the scope of what the thing is? Because we have to know what it is. It could be in the home services. It could be, hey, we're looking for someone to take care of our house when we're not here. We may be looking for a turnkey landscaping company that takes care of everything, including planting flowers, all the multi. So again, what's the scope? And then here's where oftentimes people don't ask the tough questions. They don't know who the decision makers are, and they don't want to ask. And we've all had that awful conversation at the car dealership saying, hey, what can I do to get you to buy a car today? And you can stop using terms from the 80s. And what keeps you up at night is the term we used to term. And then a time frame. Our job as business owners are twofold. One is to keep deal flow going, and two, understand how to go about managing that process, right? So again, that's the deal flow. So that deal. And at this point, we have two things that we have to know about the deal flow. We have to know some type of percentage of probabilities of closing, and we need to know a time frame. This is where you put. So we go from numbers to actual numbers to. So let's just say a deal's worth, to me, let's just say it's worth $40K, and they're going to close in 3 of 26, right? So we're going to need to know those items because they're important, right? Then they're basically they're going to become a deal. Well, no, that is the deal. Sorry. There are two references to a deal. There's two things that are going to happen. They're going to say yes, or they're going to say no. And what we're doing is, as we move from percentages, so oftentimes I'll share some percentages that people use. And this is CRM Geek, so don't get too worried about it. Just listen to the words, and I'll go ahead and make some changes here. I'm just trying to figure out the erase button. There it is. We want to talk a little bit about the percentages. So you could say 20%. Oops. You could say 20%. You could say 40. You could say 60. You could say 80, and then whatever. So pros and cons. Depending on your business and how good your sales process is. I often want to think that the 40%er was probably you're going to put it on paper. 20% you're going to have a verbal. 60% and 80% you're going to, depending on your industry, your business, it may be more formal. And then 100% is perfect, because what happens when they're 100%, they become customers. And when they're customers and clients, depending on the words in your industry, they become hopefully clients for life. And then they become, and then you have opportunities to upsell them things in the future, because we all know that it's easier to sell someone who's already bought from you than it is to try to get them to sell from scratch. So let's do a quick overview. So I didn't want to make this too incredibly long, but I wanted to give this a really good 5-step process. Call it Bryan's 5 laws of selling. We're going to have suspects where we know something about them. So we know something about a suspect, and we think they would be a good person to do business with. We have prospects who we know something about. We actually have to have some direct knowledge that they may be buyers in the market. And then when there is an opportunity, they are actively seeking an answer to their problem that may be driven by them on the customer side, probably more today than ever. And then vendor and sales. By the way, people that are doing this in the market today really are changing how things are happening, because of all the video training and all the other stuff that really, really is dramatically different. And it gives you, in some ways, it's frustrating because you don't necessarily want to have that much going on in your process. But the reality of it is that it does happen, and you need to be aware of it. So now we have, we're at this opportunity stage, and we want to move it to paper, right? So that's when we move it to paper, even though we're not using paper. We know what's going on. there's some type of scope. We know the decision maker and we know the time frame. Now, oftentimes what people in old school sales management will really rap on you of like, who's the decision maker? You got to get them in the room. Sometimes that cannot happen, and that's okay, but you need to understand who that person is. When I was selling tech, a lot of times the sales process was IT director, CFO, or IT director, finance manager, HR director, and then the ultimate decision makers were the CFO, the CIO, the other stuff. So rather than go over their heads, I would just include them in the process. And even though they would not necessarily always respond, I always kept them up to date. And today, with all of the access to great information, you could just send information to the people that you're known decision makers. So if it's a couple and you're only dealing with one part or the other part, you just mail stuff to the house because you know they're going to open it and they're going to look at it. If you're sending something to a VP and you know the VP and the CIO is going on, send something in the mail to both of them, right? There's nothing wrong with, now you can't be like beating them over the head. Some businesses do that. I'm not a fan, but you can do that. Also, what's important here is you have to have a number. So at this point, once it becomes a deal, you have to have some type of stage. Now at a 20% deal, and let's just say it's, $30K, whatever it might be, that's going to have a low probability. Once it gets to 60%, these 60 and 80%ers, you should feel like those are pretty solid numbers. When you do corporate weird stuff, just matters because there's going to be negotiations of adding stuff. But the reality of it is that you just need to see the 5 big pictures of it. And then the last part of it is like, are they customer? They become a customer or client? Can they become a customer for life? And can they upsell? So I hope that helps. We call this Bryan's 5 Laws of Selling. We use this in our business every day. We use this for clients every day. I've been doing this forever. There are new words today for this, but they basically come to these 5 basic steps. So regardless if you have a 1-step close or a transactional deal that happens through a Google ad, they found about that, right? Because they think about that, your ad gets served to them because a Google ad thinks it's a suspect. They probably know something about a prospect because they're searching for it. They know they're talking, it becomes an opportunity, and then it becomes a deal. It all happens, while you're searching on Amazon or through Shopify. So again, hope this helps. I would also listen to this, and I would listen to the 2 episodes on referrals. I think those 3 steps can be the backbone of your business going forward. And I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday season and a very prosperous new year.